Welcome back. Here we will reflect on the Week 3 weekly weigh-in, which dealt with what keeps students from taking notes in class. You might recall in last week's podcast, I presented a three-step process for how to use the UDL checkpoints to address specific barriers. The first step was to consider what is the nature of the barrier. Is it in how content is represented, how individuals act or express themselves, or how individuals engage in the learning? Step 2 was to take a closer look at the checkpoints within that principle that would help address the barrier, and then double check them on udlcenter.org to ensure that it is in fact a good fit. Step 3 was to determine an actionable, concrete way to apply the checkpoint to the situation. Now let's take a look at this week's barrier. This week's barrier was some students struggle to listen and take quality notes simultaneously. A few important things to notice in here. First of all, the barrier appears to be at the student level rather than at the instructor level. And it's about listening and taking quality notes, which are how students act or express themselves. So it would seem, most intuitively, that this is an action expression barrier, and thus we ought to be looking at action expression checkpoints, right? Well, somebody might look at this and say, well, because students are struggling to listen and take quality notes at the same time, a lot of students are going to become quickly frustrated and stop paying attention or stop trying to take notes. In other words, they will become disengaged in either the lesson or the note-taking or both because of their frustration. That would be an effective issue, and is ultimately, therefore, we ought to look for ways to better engage students. Still, somebody else might suggest, this whole problem could be avoided if the instructor found different ways to represent information for students' note-taking purposes. Let's take a look at how each of these were approached. But first, I just want to make the broad point that there are often multiple ways to frame a given barrier. As such, there are multiple ways to address a given barrier based on how we frame it. And that's exactly what we saw this week. Take a look at Anne's response. Anne approached it from the perspective of action and expression, the most intuitive form of this barrier. She said, students who struggle to listen and take notes may need to record the lecture with the instructor's permission to play back later. During class, it may be helpful for them to just jot down ideas or draw mind maps or whatever works best for them. This would align with checkpoint 5.2, the use of multiple tools for construction and composition. Robert also had a similar response to this. Both of them were excellent. This approach is ultimately about student action. It enables students' split focus to be reduced during the real-time lecture and provides an additional means of reflection later. I think this could be very effective for some students. Now, Donna and Irina and Jean and Courtney and Rachel and Miriam all approached it from this perspective of we can head this off with good representation from the faculty member. For example, the instructor can provide a digital outline of the content, guided notes, before class that lists the main points and provides space for students to add their own notes. All students can preview the main points before class as needed by reading, using text-to-speech software for hearing, etc. This approach may help develop students' information processing skills. And Donna suggested this connects to Guideline 3 and Checkpoints 3.3 Guide Information Processing. This approach focuses on what the instructor can do to head off the problem. The instructor can provide an alternate form of representation and scaffolded notes, and thus reduce the nature of the barrier that we saw. This is a good idea. While nobody this week focused on how this could be an engagement problem, let me demonstrate what that might look like. The instructor may encourage students to take notes however they wish among several options, traditional, visual, recorded, etc., but can then tell them explicitly that they needn't attempt to record PowerPoint slides verbatim. As the slides will be shared on the course Canvas site, this may help students who otherwise feel stressed about recording all written information and are thus distracted from the teaching. This reflects checkpoint 7.1, minimize threats and distractions. This approach addresses the emotional or affective barrier explicitly, with the practical components serving the function of reducing student frustration. This would work too. So, which is the best answer? Well, that's what I want to break through this week. Recall what we've already explored, that there is a predictable systematic variability among the student population. In universal design for learning, we're not trying to find the best method that will work for everybody. That's simply moving the problem. We would have to ask the question, best for whom? Now consider, what if we combined several of these ideas? Instructors may invite students to record a lecture, engage in shared note-taking, and/or utilize scaffolded notes. The instructor may further explicitly encourage students that while note-taking is important, recording all details is unnecessary, as materials will be posted on the Canvas site. By using this multiplicity approach, the students can choose which of these things is best for them, and that answer will not be the same for all of the students in the class. We are empowering the students to understand what works for me and then carrying that out, and thus reducing the barriers from a much wider range of the population than what we could ever hope to do with any singular approach. Thus, in UDL, we believe that one size does not fit all. In UDL theory, we believe that there is almost never a single one-size-fits-all solution, no matter how good the solution may be. The best answer is always the provision of options so that students may decide what works best for them in that situation on that day. So while we are voting for the best response, it means that a well-articulated response that uses the checkpoints well, but best is misnomer if we take it to mean a single solution that would work for almost everyone. For example, let's look at Anne's great idea. Can you think of any students for whom recording the lecture via audio may not be helpful? It's a great option, but it's a poor one-size-fits-all solution. So again, we're going to be looking for using a few options that will cover a tremendous amount of ground and meet the needs of various students by allowing them to choose what works best for them.